thank you so much. The program this morning on ITV, on independent television here in Benin City. Of course, I did tell you that one of our focal points on our discussion segment today is to look at the law that was a bill some time ago, but just by the singular act of the president, eventually it became a law. Talking about the disability bill that has been passed into law. And of course, you know that before this time, when we talk about disabled people in our country, there was really no legislation, so to say, to back up their claims and to also support their rights in the country. And this even becomes more expedient when you get to, get to know and also get to realize what they go through in life. And, just to be normal people, just to enjoy what you and I enjoy as citizens of this country. Well, looking at the bill that has been passed into law, the disability, bill that passed by the president, how can this bill, or how can this law now be, be upheld by all of us all? Because it's not just enough for the president to pass the bill into a law. How can we make sure that when you see somebody that is, disabled in one way or the other, that you quickly remember that there is a law, that that person has got some rights. And you have to be very, very careful, because if care is not taken, you might just be a major defaulter of that person's rights. Well, talking about the disability bill this morning, we are so privileged to have Barrister Omosa. Yes, Barrister Omosa Melody is the president of NAPFI, that's Network for Advancement of People Living with Visible Disability. Sir, you're welcome to this program this morning on ITV.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm glad to be here again.
Okay. Now, I know this passage of this bill into law is something that you have probably been waiting for. So what is your immediate response, or how do you think this bill is going to go down with people living with one form of disability or the other?
Thank you very much. The assent to the Prohibition Against Discrimination Act of Persons with Disabilities, assented to by Mr. President, His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, on the 23rd of January, exactly a week ago, came as a huge relief to the persons with disabilities community in Nigeria. For too long, this community has lived without any form of legal framework recognizing their right to exist as equal citizens in this nation. And since the advent of democracy in 1999, organizations of persons with disabilities, civil society groups, and even our development partners have been calling for a law to guarantee the spectrums of rights of people with disabilities, especially since the passage of the United Nations United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2006, which Nigeria is a signatory to. We are told that immediately after Nigeria ratified that document, it will take steps in line with our constitution to domesticate it by having a disability act in place at the center, and at every state in the federation, a disability law. But even though we had the 5th, 6th, and 7th National Assembly passing the disability bill, the former presidents refused to assent to that bill, so that at every point in time, we have to start all over. And thank God, on the 29th of March 2018, the National Assembly eventually passed that bill again. The 8th National Assembly passed that bill and transmitted same to Mr. President for his assent. Of course, for those who followed closely, you know that there was this argument as to where was the bill. The president feigned ignorance of the bill at a point, but about 1 week after that, the news came to us, like I said, with great relief, and it indeed gladdens our heart that he finally assented to that bill on the 23rd of January this month. So, first, what this portends for people with disability is that the rights, they do not have, I mean, they now have a right like every other Nigerian to coexist in this society as free entities without any form of discrimination. This becomes particularly important because the fundamental laws as guaranteed in our constitution, the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, section 33 to 45, that talks about the different fundamental rights of Nigerians, fail to recognize that people with disabilities have rights to coexist without discrimination. For instance, section 42(1) of the law says no Nigerian should be discriminated against as a result of his sex, ethnic background, religion, political opinion, and etc. But that law or constitution, as we have it in other African countries, Uganda, South Africa and all that, did not mention disabilities as one of the grounds of non-discrimination. So it actually became pertinent that we needed to have a law in place that will safeguard the rights of people with disabilities. So this, for us, is a very welcome development, almost 20 years after our democracy, that the narrative is changing presently for people with disabilities, that no longer would they be discriminated only because they are such persons that want one form of disability or the other. And again, when you look at the population of people with disability in this nation, we are well over 27.3 million Nigerians with disabilities. That is the size of several African nations put together. And then this is by the United Nations statistics. And not to have had a law that protects the rights of this class of Nigerians for too long was not good for us as a nation.
But again, okay, let me leave that there because you know, when you have this kind of gesture, so to say, most especially the time is coming, people begin to see all forms of explanation to it. There are some, you know, some certain people that probably see it as a political stunt. After all, it's the election period and all that. But we're not talking about that now. Now, there is no doubt that this law is going to criminalize any defaulter, and of course, it criminalizes the prohibition against those with physical disability and all that. And also, you know, it's going to see how the rights of these people is going to be respected. Now, let's look at the content, because I had to also try to see so that we can further let our viewers know that what this bill really entails. Now, it guarantees right to maintain civil action for damage by the person injured against any defaulter. And of course, we're also told that it provides for a 5-year transitional period within which public buildings, structures, or automobiles are to be modified to be accessible to the usable by persons with disabilities, including those on wheelchair. And also, we are told that before erecting any public structure, its plan shall be scrutinized by the relevant authority to ensure that the plan conforms with the building code. These are some of the contents of this law, this bill that has been passed into law now. Now, there are challenges. You know, looking at the kind of environment that we are in. At times, you find that authorities that are supposed to do what they're supposed to do to ensure that laws are adhered to won't just do their job. And of course, that becomes a challenge. So how do you think we can really fight some of these challenges in order so that at the end of the day, this bill can really come to stand?
All right, for so long again, society has been structured in such a way that it does torture to people with disabilities. Because here, Nigerians, especially those of them that are in a position to render one service or the other, public service, do not recognize the rights of people with disabilities to access some of these facilities. And now we have a law in place. The starting point would be to educate and enlighten the public, including the operators themselves, government themselves, that there is an existence of an act that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. Also, that such discrimination is now actionable, either by the relevant authority or by persons with disabilities themselves. Not only does this act criminalizes discrimination against people with disabilities, but it also, like you read now, has given persons with disability the right to proceed against such institution or individual and claim damages where need be. And for institution, it is ₦1 million fine. And for individuals, 100,000 or 6 months imprisonment, or both. So that when you find cause to discriminate against persons with disability, for the fact only that is such a one, you're conducting employment, for instance, a child, someone with disability applies, and you wouldn't take him or her on the ground that he has a disability, not because he's not eminently qualified, except you have good cause to show why he's not considered, haven't passed through the test, haven't had requisite qualification, then an action can lie against you for discrimination. Or you wouldn't take a child with disability into your educational institution because he's such a one that is only that he has a disability. These are issues that the law seeks to protect as far as it concerns persons with disability. So we need to let the society know that there's such a law in place presently, and they must be very conscious in treating and dealing with people with disabilities. And again, of course, yes, public buildings and facilities should be accessible to people with disabilities. Public information should be accessible to people with disability in formats they can relate with. And these are some of the provisions of the law. It becomes really serious for any officer of government, especially those in charge of approving building codes. No new structure can go up without it conforming and complying with the relevant building codes that would give and guarantee access for people with disabilities. Because why would you erect high-rise building without elevators? Why would you have buildings without ramps for those on wheelchair to be able to access? In other insane climes, your act will be termed discriminatory, because society is not made of just one shade of persons. If you do anything that would not guarantee the access by other kinds of citizens, your act will be termed discriminatory. And government will not even want to do any business with you, because you are not carrying everyone along. So no new building, like I said, will go up henceforth without conforming to this relevant building code. And for the existing ones, there is a 5-year transition period to make their building, do the necessary amendments to ensure that such facilities can be accessed without restraint to people with disabilities.
Okay. Now, there's also this part of the law that talks about the discrimination, against people with disability in terms of public transportation.
Yes.
As a public, facility, and also we're told that the service providers are to make provision for the physically, visually, and hearing impaired, and all persons whosoever challenged. This applies to seaports, railways, and airport facilities. Now, we also, you see, this is why somehow some will say, governments, are they really aware of some of these things? Now, we have public transport facilities around, in our environments and all that, as provided by governments. Now, how can this begin to mean meaningfully to even the government now, so that they will begin to know that, okay, from henceforth, there is a bill that if we are providing transportation for the physically challenged, they should be brought into consideration too?
All right. Interestingly, I've heard from a number of government functionaries who travel out to say that they see what is obtainable outside the country. Yeah. They've talked about people on wheelchair, how they're able to access public transport, entering with their wheelchair. A provision is made for them. When the vehicle pulls over, a ramp comes out from the bus, and they, without being aided, get on board the vehicle. And when he gets he or she gets to his point of termination, he disembarks unaided too. Priority is given to such persons. I've heard this repeatedly from government for, and a number of them travel. They see all those. It's just for them to know that what you see and you applaud outside the shores of this country, there is a law mandating you to ensure that such services are provided. So when you are thinking of transportation, be it road, sea, or air transportation, you must ensure that people with disabilities are carried along. And we do not have so much problem with air transport because, of course, we do not manufacture planes in this country. And so the planes that we have that international standard, we have cause to travel. Some of us who have cause to travel by air see the treatment that people with disabilities are given, even within the country. But the case is not so when we go by road, because these vehicles, we go there to buy vehicles that do not conform with the right of mobility of people with disability from one point to the other. So I think that it behoves government to take the needed step to ensure that all public vehicles provided by government, and to also lead the way for other private, for the private sector that goes into mass transportation, to ensure that their vehicle can be accessed by people with disability. This is essential. Because why should I leave my home? I want to get from point A to B to my place of work, and I cannot access public transport that is made for all citizens of this country. So this discrimination comes either by deliberately and positively discriminating against people with disability, or by omitting to do the needful. So it could either be an act or an omission. Whether you do or you fail to do, much as that condition that you have the possibility, you have the right to change, affects negatively and impact negatively on people with disabilities, you have discriminated against.
Okay.
And
now,
the law imposes an obligation on you to ensure that people with disabilities are not discriminated against.
Okay. There's also part of the law that talks about making at least 5% available of
job opportunities
yes. For any establishments, for employers and all that. Now, yes. You also find out that at times, people with one form of disability or the other, they also don't have the requisites, the needed qualification to even attract this opportunity, for them to attract it to themselves. Take, for example, this bill that has been passed into law. Most people with one form of disability or the other, they may not even be educated enough to know that they have some of these rights. Now, how can we, go about this?
No, let me quickly say that the intent of this law is not to give persons with disabilities job who are not qualified for the job. It is not that when you are employing as an employer of labor, you must ensure that 5% of your workforce are persons with disabilities, whether or not they are qualified. That is not it. We are saying persons with disabilities who otherwise are qualified for this job have the needed requisite qualification, but only for the fact that either they are on a wheelchair, go on crutches, or they are visually impaired or hearing impaired. You want to deny them of that opportunity, then the law criminalizes it. That's what we are talking about here. We're not talking about those who are not qualified. It's not a tea party. But we have several persons with disabilities, PhD holders, master's holders, first degree holders, who roam the streets. And we know that if government do not employ them, sometimes private sectors do not want to engage them. You would agree that from your interaction, you have seen persons with disabilities who can very competently contend and compete with their able-bodied counterparts, not regarding the fact that they have a disability. So we are saying here that employers of labor must open their doors to people with disabilities and assess this one on the basis of what they know, on the content, on what they have to bring to the table, if they can do the job. What stops an accountant on a wheelchair from working in the bank? Once he has access to the environment, he works with his head, with his brain. So it is not their physicality. It is what they have It is the content within them. But they are often rated in this part of the country by their physicality. In other countries, where we have laws like this in place, employers of labor are quick to look for people with disabilities and engage them, because they know for a fact that they are going to get a form of incentive by way of tax relief for such act. So I think it's one way that government, apart from employing persons with disabilities, apart from blazing the trail, to also ensure that private employers of labor are given certain incentive by way of tax relief to encourage them to take off the streets people with disabilities. We know that education is about the only way we can reasonably compete with our able-bodied counterpart. But it becomes very saddening, having made all effort to be educated and acquire the relevant skills and knowledge, you are discriminated against when it comes to employment only because you are one with a disability. That right, narrative must change.
Yeah, Barrister Melody, as we wrap up now. Now, let's look at some of the prospects that this bill will further attract to the disabled.
Education is one of them.
Okay.
It guarantees education for people with disability, not just the universal basic education that terminates at JSS 3, but all the way. Primary and secondary education is guaranteed for people with disabilities. They have access to health care. They have access, as we have already mentioned, to employment. We know that we've just entered a new phase of the struggle. Like you said earlier when we started, having a law in place is one step, but implementing same is another. Yeah. So we are going to raise the tempo. Organization of persons with disability, working with civil society bodies and all women in Nigerians, we are going to raise the tempo to ensure that all those who have a duty to ensure that this law or act is implemented do so without any further delay. And also to encourage states that do not have this law in place. Lagos have. Anambra just signed theirs into law. There is a disability law in Kano, but those states do not have one in place. And so we will be calling on government. There is a need for the states to domesticate this, to replicate this in their states, so that you make some consequential amendments and ensure that it tallies, favorably tailors with your own laws in the state, taking into cognizance your own cultural perspective. So we will call on those state government, the State House of Assembly, and indeed the executive, to take steps to ensure that we have this law in place.
Thank you, Barrister Melody Omosa is the president of NAVID. NAVID stands for Network for Advancement of People Living with Visible Disabilities. And I think it's very instructional to all of us, also especially to people that have been discriminating against those with disability, trying to look down on them. Now, you need to know that there is a law that prohibits that discrimination. And of course, once the law gets up with you, definitely you either pay a fine of 100,000 as an individual or as an institution, organization. You pay a fine of 1 million. When you have your establishment, you don't have a platform, so to say, for those with disability to come into your establishment and do business with you. I think that's what that part of that bill talks about. Well, thank you so much, Barrister Melody Omosa, for finding time to come.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I saw you stretch your hand.
Yes,
thank you so much.